my name is Simba Elijah Charles Kiage. Welcome to the Big Ten.
Hello, and my name is Brandon Emichamba.
All right, now we are joined by We begin the Big Ten this week by the announcement from the government that Kenya's economy grew by 6.3% in 2018, up from 4.9% in 2017.
Now, the 2019 Economic Survey report indicates the growth to significant improvement in the performance of the agriculture and manufacturing sector.
Kenya's 2018 economic growth was also supported by enhanced growth in service-related sectors such as communication, transport, and tourism.
And so on this week's Big Ten, we ask, is Kenya on course to achieving a double-digit economic growth rate as indicated in the Vision 2030?
Well, I'll say that's a bit ambitious, especially since last year we had the strongest growth that we've had in the last almost 8 years at 6.3%. And what was driving the growth last year is not expected to continue the same way this year, because last year's growth of 6.3 was driven by agriculture, growth in agriculture, and other interlinked sectors like manufacturing and the like. For this year, we don't expect agriculture to experience the same growth. Why? Because we had the onset of the long rains has not yet come as expected. So we expect a bit of a slowdown if you compare to last year, and we also don't expect the 6.3% that we experienced last year. We had an improved business environment if you compare to the previous year, which was 2017. 2017 we had drought early in the year, and also had the elections that weighed down on growth. So coming from that base, 2018 we was set up for a better economic performance. We also had a growth not only in agriculture and manufacturing, but also in sectors like hotel and accommodation, that is tourism, infrastructure, ICT, in communication and technology, and also the financial sector had an improved performance owing to banks adapting to the interest rate cap that was placed in 2016.
Now over to the second big item on the Big Ten this week. The manufacturing sector received a boost through the commissioning of a 7 shillings billion plant confectionery maker Mars Wrigley, which also marked its 50th birthday in Kenya.
The new factory, set on a 20-acre piece of land in Mavoko, Machakos County, has replaced the old plant that was located in Nairobi's industrial area.
Now, Brenda, amid the fanfare over the launch of the plant, now huge concerns exist over the stumbling blocks that exist in the economy to such huge investments ranging from bribery, official extortion, and bureaucracy.
And now this brings us to our question, which is, what can we do more as a country to attract direct foreign investments, and is Kenya's private sector attractive to foreign investment?
I think issues to do with corruption, very clear, which is something I think government is dealing with in this region. In terms of benefits of having this plant in Kenya, there's issues to do with employment that is likely to come. This company, Mars Wrigley, also does a lot of exports, so we are also going to gain from foreign exchange out of the export of the confectionery. The issues to do with boosting our tax base, because they also pay taxes, and generally also boosting our real estate environment and investment in the region. It has a lot of benefits. If you look at, perhaps the attractiveness of private sector environment to direct foreign investment. We've improved in ease of doing business, so that's why we are attracting some of this. We have among the available and most technical labor or capacity in the region. That's why we are attracting some of this. We are also entrepreneurial, and such companies are able to benefit from their value chain system. They're able to get their goods moving. And in terms of benefits, mainly on tax, issues to do with exports, so getting foreign exchange locally. We are also going to get employment for our youth. Currently, the plant employs more than 1,000 employees directly and of course through the value chain, and this is some of the benefits that are coming to it. And then generally contribution to our GDP in terms of our ambitious Big Four agenda, where we want to double our contribution to GDP from manufacturing. The private sector is more lucrative compared to perhaps public in terms of attracting direct foreign investment. One of the major things will be red tape or bureaucracy that is associated with the public sector that is avoided in private sector, and this is what is attracting some of these companies that are coming to set up, and especially in manufacturing.
Data from the National Treasury now indicates that Kenya's public debt is costing more than half of tax revenues.
Cash spent in servicing Kenya's ballooning debt, which is currently at 5.4 trillion Kenyan shillings, increased by 75% in the 9 months to March this year.
All right, Brenda, which makes us ask the question, is Kenya staring at another debt crisis?
Well, Simba, let's find out from our experts.
Say that we have a lot to be done in terms of debt management. If you look at our debt to GDP ratio is about 57%. That's above the recommended threshold of 50% of debt to GDP. However, we also have to look at it from what are we borrowing to do? Let's say we're borrowing in order to expand on infrastructure-related developments like the SGR, LAPSSET and the like, building roads. This is expected in the long term to improve our economic performance. However, the time lag between the cost of expanding, because you're expanding the cost now, that's why we're borrowing now, and the benefits, that is what we're going to reap once our economic growth picks up. We can't have the projects taking too long to mature and too long to be finalized and actually lead to this economic growth. Because when it takes too long, then we continue to pay serve this debt, because we took a lot of commercial loans to improve our infrastructure and to carry out these projects, and they have to be paid on a yearly basis. So that's why we find that even the debt service costs have increased. We took a Eurobond, we have to retire one in the current fiscal year, that is in the remaining 3 months. The talks of bringing going actually to the market for another Eurobond, which will also just exacerbate the debt payments, if you will ask. But also looking at it from this perspective of our budget increases every year, and the only way to fund the budget is either through revenues, that's from KRA, or from borrowing. And when KRA lags behind its collection targets, then we have to plug in the shortfall through borrowing. So we're kind of even in a I'll say in a catch-22. I wouldn't say we are currently in a debt crisis, though we are above the recommended limits. Economy is still growing, and we expect in the long term, medium to long term, that these projects will actually improve our economic growth. So this should, with the increase of the base, then the debt to GDP ratio should come down to better levels of below 50%.
Staying on matters public debt on the Big Ten. Now, China is emerging as Kenya's largest bilateral lender. Data from the National Treasury now indicates that the outstanding debt balance to China stood at 560 billion shillings in 2018.
Meanwhile, China launched a staunch defense of its Belt and Road global infrastructure in a summit with a pledge to ease concerns on debt that was linked to its signature foreign policy. Question is Kenya's growing alliance to China a cause for worry?
I don't think the reliance is a cause for worry, as long as apart from the part where we have people are getting concerned about the debt, which will have also been discussed. The reliance, because it's giving us good connections with China. I saw that our farmers are not able to export avocado to China. I don't think our reliance will be of big worry as long as the country is able to benefit. The growing appetite for debt, especially from China, is a cause for worry because we are not able to see a payment plan that the government is giving us in terms of how we are planning to repay the debt we are taking from China. And the investments that are being made with this debt, are we asking the question whether they are able to actually give us enough revenue to be able to cover for the interest and the principals for this debt? So yes, the debt is a growing concern, but what the government needs to do is be clear on the payment plan they have on this debt.
Earlier this month, the government moved to introduce another deduction on the taxpayers' payslips in Kenya. Employers were required as from 9th of May 2019 to deduct to deduct housing levy at the rate of 1.5% of one's gross salary and much the same towards the housing levy.
The introduction of the housing levy has, however, elicited huge public opposition, with employers having already moved to court to block the implementation of the levy. The legal case notwithstanding, is the government facing a crisis of not having confidence, or is it a case of the government not approaching this the right way in order to provide affordable housing for Kenyans? And how will Kenyans benefit from this fund?
The National Housing Fund is a noble thing to happen to any other country. We are not the first one. If you look at the proposed 1.5% came in at the right time. I think the process and how it is being implemented is where there's challenge. There was very little public participation and perhaps public awareness in terms of then what is it in for them in terms of when they contribute the money. There is no incentives around, especially the would-be employers who are also partly contributing to this levy. So I think the most important thing is for Kenyans to be told about what is it in for them in terms of when you contribute, then what happens. But the benefits are huge. It is, if you look at the whole thing about real estate, is capital intensive, and government is looking for other ways to co-finance the development of affordable housing. And one of the key ways which has been used elsewhere is being to come up with a levy that employers and employees are able to contribute. Nigeria have had a similar levy, actually paying 2.5 instead of 1.5 for the last 29 years. So they just actually did a change in that law to make it more better about a few months ago. So it's something that, and if you look at it from a Nigerian case study, you will see that they have had benefits. They benefit to be able to have people access to houses. They still have challenges, of which I think as Kenyan our housing project, we need to relook into how do we make our processes and ensure that there's inclusivity in coming up with a levy. Because as it stands now, there are complaints about the country has just about 3 million formally employed people, with 80% of the employment people being informal, who are not affected in this. There's no clarity on how the houses will be shared. There's no clarity on how the fund will be managed. There's no transparency. There's the whole fear around, will the money be mismanaged? So those are some of the things that if government can address, then they'll have the typical target, employer and employee buying in. If you look at the seriousness of the Ministry of Infrastructure and Housing and Urban Development, they seems to be really keen to make sure that this goes through. If you look at the president and his zeal around the Agenda 4 in general, there's keenness to make sure that this agenda succeed.
So now, Brenda, we take a break, and once we come back, we continue with the Big Ten.
Remember, you can catch all the episodes of the Big Ten on our social media platforms at Metroport TV KE. But for now, see you after the break.
All right.
all about business terms is something I love doing. You've heard of the word debit. This one I know you know.
We are keen on actively playing our role in positioning Kenya as an investment hub for East and Middle Africa.
Welcome back to the Big Ten. My name is Simba Elijah Charles Kiak.
And I'm Brenda Nemichaba.
Alright, you're watching Metropole Television. Let's cross over therefore and look at the next big item on the Big Ten this week. About a month ago on the Big Ten, we reported increases of maize flour in the country from 85 shillings for a 2 kilogram packet of maize to a high of 109 shillings. This despite a bumper harvest last year.
Now, maize prices today continue to heat up, with a 90 kilogram bag now going for 3,400 Kenyan shillings, up from the 2,700 Kenyan shillings barely a fortnight ago.
Which therefore raises a question, is there more than meets the eye on the prevailing trend of maize prices in the country? And what will it take to stem this out? Let's get our expert's opinion on this.
Commodities generally have been affected mainly by drought, but with maize having not in the season of harvesting, and considering the country produced an oversupply last season, up to about 46 million bags, it tells you that in a typical market, we expect demand and supply to balance the prices. Now, a few months down the line after the harvest, almost 6 months since the last harvest, and we're having a shortage, then there are other mechanisms that are playing in that are not necessarily being brought about by supply and demand. So then you look at what is likely to be happening. Is there hoarding by some within stakeholders within the supply chain? Is there some issues to do with keeping well of the maize? So these are some of the things that needs to be looked into, because even the backlog of our storage in our cereal board that remained in 2017 was supposed to be distributed, but at a point there was reports that it was not good for human consumption. And if that is true, then this could be what is affecting, because the government had initially planned to buy 2 million bags, 2.5 million bags, but scaled this down to buy 2 million, just also to play with the price after farmers had rejected the initial offering by the government. So it tells you then there must be issues in the value chain of the grain maize that needs to be looked into in terms of is there hoarding, is there spoilage, because typically given the timelines that the season ended and the oversupply that was there and our normal demand curve in terms of consumption, then you are not likely to be seeing this at this time. Most important thing is to try and give self-regulation, especially in maize supply chain or in production. I will expect, for instance, government to see into it. Do we need to have the whole grain handling devolved into the units that are actually producing them? Or how do we ensure that even as we have a national policy around maize control and maize, our grain control and grain storage and strategic grain, how do we then involve other stakeholders, including millers, in the decision making around strategic storage? How do we involve farmers who produce in the decision making around strategic storage? And by involving all stakeholders, then there's no blame game of perhaps farmers are hoarding, perhaps millers are hoarding, or perhaps the strategic grain handlers are also not releasing the product into the market.
Boeing's co-insurers faced big insurance claims from families of the crashed Ethiopian Airlines coming 6 months after a crash of the same type of aircraft, that is Indonesian Insurance and Aviation.
Questions on the safety of the Boeing 737 MAX 8 were raised after an Ethiopian passenger airline jet that was bound for Nairobi crashed minutes after it took off, killing 157 people on board. And another one crashed in Indonesia in October.
Now, according to the Montreal Convention, each of the families of the crashed Ethiopian Airlines could receive as much as 17 million shillings for each of the lives lost. Now, the amounts can vary depending on factors like age, profession, and position in life. Initial reports now indicate that Ethiopian Airlines insurers are going to incur the cost, but they could recoup their money if they prove that the aircraft was faulty. Question is, how has this been faring on, and has the money been paid?
I do know of some cases already in court against Boeing because of the issues that were there with the 737 MAX jets. So we do expect that to happen, and Boeing will eventually compensate some of the, or actually should compensate all of the families. Putting a price on the lives. Well, Boeing is a profitable company, a big company. I think that these payouts actually are deserved.
Meanwhile, on the global front, the price of crude is steadily rising, with the price of a Brent North Sea crude hitting a 6-month high above $75 per barrel this Thursday.
All right, this owing to supply concerns that have been worsened by the United States of America tightening the screw on sanctions that hit Iran.
The move by Washington to remove waivers that allow countries to buy oil from Iran is expected to hit oil supply. Now, the question is, where does this trend put Kenya, as oil is its biggest import?
Given that we import our oil, so if the global oil prices go up, then we expect that also our oil prices will go up, and this is something that had been predicted at the beginning of the year. And this will affect the cost of oil in the country, which in return affects the transport and effectively affects also manufacturing, and then the ripple effect will lead to maybe an increase in inflation. If the cost of transport goes up, it means that Kenyans will be charged more for their transport, and there will also be, if the cost of manufacturing goes up because of the increase in oil prices, then it means that the produced goods and services will also be more expensive. When it comes to an increase in oil prices, the negative impact is just the increase in inflation that we expect, yes.
Mergers, acquisitions in the banking sector. It's not the first time that we speak about this headline on the Big Ten. This week, we are at it again, as last week, KCB Group announced its intent to own the state-owned National Bank of Kenya. Brenda.
The proposed transaction, which is subject to regulatory and shareholder approval, adds to the growing list of mergers in the banking sector within the country.
Which therefore leads us to ask this question: what does this acquisition mean to the banking sector in the country? And do we expect therefore to see more mergers and acquisitions in the banking sector in the near future? Let's put this question to our experts as we intend to close the week. All nice for you.
Well, we do expect consolidation in the banking sector to increase even going forward. We've been calling for that, especially since the introduction of the interest rate cap, as smaller banks that are not as profitable have challenges in the operation or are not as well capitalized, they're finding it harder to compete in the banking sector industry. So what's actually best for the sector is for these banks to either come together in terms of mergers or be acquired by a bigger bank that is more stable, and eventually to lead to a better and more stable banking sector. For KCB, KCB is looking for growth assets in its balance sheet growth, and also NBK will bring to the table a lot of public sector clients who are quite good and attractive. For KCB and NBK, it's a bit interesting because they have common shareholders, so it became easier for the that is the Treasury and the NSSF. It became easier for them to actually propose that said merger of the two banks. We do expect consolidation to pick up, so that is either mergers or acquisitions. We're finding that actually banks are acquiring other banks at cheaper valuations now. This could be because of the depressed profitability or because of the lack of sufficient capital that some of these banks have. So we do expect more consolidation to pick up. Possibly Tier 2 banks can also see what's happening and merge the operations to form a bigger and more stable bank, or Tier 3 banks that are struggling can be acquired by larger Tier 1 banks.
Let's go regional now, as Uganda has received 2 planes purchased in a bid to relaunch Uganda Airlines.
That is indeed true, as the airline plans to commence flights to regional neighbors in Eastern and Southern Africa before expanding to Middle Asia, that is Middle East, Asia and Europe. Tanzania, Kenya, Uganda and Rwanda can now boast of having national airlines.
Now the question is, what does this mean to Nairobi as the regional hub?
All right, another question, Brenda, that we should be asking ourselves on the Big Ten as we close is, what does the addition of a new airline mean to the aviation sector for East Africa?
I think it's a good for the industry in terms of bringing in new blood, new competition, which of course with competition services improve, quality of services improve, in able to, as they compete for the same client. In terms of Uganda, a good move in ensuring that they are able to also play in about competition, because the country airline is mainly dominated by Kenyan airline, South African airline, Ethiopian airline, Rwandan airline. So the competition is likely to bring prices or affordability in terms of sustainability, in terms of prices. There's also just general revitalization of service industry with an airline, because there's that also pride around having a national airline. And perhaps also issues to do with attracting regional airline or customers who are coming in terms of tourists. Yeah.
Well, for the transport, air transport especially, I think the first thing that needs to be done in order to increase inter-regional transfer is airlines should be allowed to navigate into other countries' airspace without having to switch, the codes and stuff. Especially even we have Ethiopian Airlines also to the top, and all the competition is actually increasing. With Nairobi set up as the regional hub that we are, and a lot of traveling connecting through Nairobi, we're still set up in a good space. For East Africa, the competition has increased in the airlines industry. So the issue is a lot of these airlines are backed by the government. That's why even though they're not as profitable, they're still having a lifeline. A sort of national strategic initiatives. So we still expect that to be the case. In terms of revenue sharing, I think that's one of the aspects that most of the airlines will have to look at, because we have a lot of inter-regional flights and travel.
We've reached the end of today's Big Ten. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Brandon Emichaba.
My name is Simba Elijah Charles Kiage. I want to thank all the experts who made this a Big Ten indeed on this week of Friday when the rains are back in Nairobi.
And remember to catch the Big Ten on our social media platforms at Metropole TV KE. But for now, till next time.
See you next time.